Ralph Graves was a popular silent leading man and comedian in the 1920s, and easily transitioned to starring in the talkies in the early 30s. But by the end of that decade, he was in character work. Why? Join me as I investigate. Ralph Graves was born as Ralph Taylor in Cleveland in 1900 to George and Lillian Taylor. George and Lillian divorced in 1902, and in 1904, George was tragically murdered. In 1906, Lillian married John Horsburgh, who adopted Ralph and gave him his surname legally. I couldn't find much information about the rest of Ralph's childhood. It is thought that as a teenager, Ralph entered a contest to enter the movies, resulting in a move to Chicago to make his film debut at the age of 17 in SNA's 1917 industrial short, The Troubles of a Merchant and How to Stop Them, which essentially was an advertisement for store owners to switch to cash registers. Ralph was off to a great start, and in 1918, SNA starred him as one of the leading men to Mary McLean in Men Who Have Made Love to Me, which McLean apparently based on her real-life dating stories. Moving Picture World gave Ralph a great notice for his performance. It appears that later in 1918, Ralph moved to New York, where he worked at various studios into 1919, including 2 films at World Pictures, one of which saw him top billed, Sporting Life, and 3 pictures at Universal, including 2 where he played the leading man to Mae Murray, The Scarlet Shadow and What Am I Bid? Later in 1919, Ralph appears to have signed with Paramount, where he was leading man to Dorothy Gish in Nobody Home. While at Paramount, Ralph was noticed by D.W. Griffith, who borrowed him for 3 pictures between 1919 and 1921. First, he supported Richard Barthelmess, Carol Dempster, and Clarine Seymour in Scarlet Days. Then he played John Hilton Jr. in The Greatest Question. In 1921, he starred as Spike McFadden alongside Carol Dempster and Charles Mack in Dream Street. Variety raved about his performance and stated, "Ralph Graves makes one of the most striking screen characterizations in the Griffith repertoire." Sometime in the early 20s, Ralph moved from New York to California and spent the next several years making a name for himself as one of Hollywood's busiest leading men, sometimes in his own vehicles, which includes 1923's Ghost Patrol, and sometimes as leading man to some of the biggest leading ladies around, such as working with Marion Davies in the epic Yolanda in 1924. He also began making quite a name for himself in comedy, starring in a series of successful features and comedy shorts for the remainder of the decade. Highlights of his comedy work include 1922's Come On Over with Colleen Moore, 1923's The Extra Girl, which is hilarious and also starred Mabel Normand, 1925's Max Sennett short The Plumber, and 1928's That Certain Thing, also hilarious, which also starred Viola Dana. If all of that wasn't enough, he also began writing and directing his own movies in 1926, including Swell Hogan in 1926 and A Reno Divorce in 1927. Legend has it that Swell Hogan was not a great movie, and it was produced by young Howard Hughes, and since it wasn't great, Graves ordered the sole copy to be destroyed, and it never saw the light of day. However, his other directorial efforts seem to have fared better. Side note, his writing career continued through 1944, and he even wrote the screenplay and the story for John Gilbert's 1931 film West of Broadway. It's no surprise that Ralph made a successful transition from silent talkie leading man. In 1929, he starred with Ramon Navarro in the MGM synchronized sound film The Flying Fleet. But he made his true talkie debut later that year in the sadly lost Glad Ragdoll with Dolores Costello, which got mixed reviews. However, later in 1929, Ralph signed with Columbia and starred in Frank Capra's Flight with Jack Holt and Lila Lee, a great picture about a Marine flyer and his mentor who both fall in love with the same nurse. It was a huge commercial hit, and Ralph got an outstanding review in Variety, who stated, "It's an even bet now that Graves, with his voice and presence, will rank among the leading draws of the screen within a year." Well, Variety's prediction came true, sort of. 1930 was another big year for Ralph. he was leading man to Barbara Stanwyck in her breakthrough starring role in Ladies of Leisure, also directed by Capra. Playing against type as a broody artist who hires a party girl from the wrong side of the tracks to be his model, only to fall in love with her. The film was a commercial smash and launched Stanwyck into megastardom. However, Ralph sadly got mixed reviews for his work, which doesn't necessarily surprise me, as his character was kind of unfortunately bland in comparison to Stanwyck's. But that was the whole point of his character, so he played it very well. I think Columbia must have sensed this was kind of a miscast and decided to reteam Ralph with Jack Holt again in a few more Armed Forces adventure films, hoping to recapture the success of Flight. First, they starred in Hell's Island and competed over Dorothy Sebastian. Next, they starred in Dirigible and competed over Fay Wray. Despite, again, being directed by Capra, Dirigible apparently failed to capture the critical and commercial success of Flight, although it is an excellent film and can still be seen. Sadly, 1932's War Correspondent, which brought Lila Lee back to join Ralph and Holt, also sadly didn't do well. In 1931, Ralph was loaned to Tiffany to give one of his most interesting performances, that of a hardened street criminal, Jim Platt, in Salvation Nell, whom Helen Chandler's title character attempts to save through her love. In 1932, Ralph was loaned to MGM to star in two pictures, first reuniting with Ramon Navarro in Huddle, and then playing Jackie Cooper's father in The Tearjerker, When a Feller Needs a Friend. Ralph then strangely took 2 years off from acting and writing in 1932. When he returned to the screen in 1934, he found himself as a B-movie leading man, starring in several films at Poverty Row between 1934 and 1936, including Ticket to a Crime, the excellent film Speed Limited, and the adventure serial The Black Coin. From 1936 until 1949, Ralph moved into character actor territory, bringing his memorable presence and talent to every role that he played, no matter the size. Highlights during this period include 1939's Three's Texas Steers, which starred Carol Landis and John Wayne, 1939's Street of Missing Men, which starred Charles Bickford, playing Winslow Harrison, a rich man who was rescued by our heroes in the Batman and Robin serial in 1949, and playing a man hiding a past in Alimony in 1949, which teamed him with Martha Vickers. Ralph's final film was 1949's Joe Palooka and the Counterpunch. After its completion, Ralph retired. According to Trav SD, he dabbled in real estate later in life. He had also married Betty Flournoy in 1934. Aside from his real estate ventures, I can assume that Ralph spent the rest of his life in quiet retirement with his wife and their daughter, also named Betty. He passed away in 1977 at the age of 77. So we are left with the question, why did Ralph Graves transition from leading man to character actor by the end of the 30s? Well, I think the process was first set in motion by Columbia mismanaging his career early on in the talkies. He had a very successful persona as the humorous, lovable, aw shucks boy next door, and they decided to break that mold and cast him as a brooding, rich, kind of chauvinistic guy in Ladies of Leisure, which probably wouldn't have been such a big deal had it not been a massive hit and a star-making vehicle for Barbara Stanwyck. While Ralph did well with the material, I don't think the public liked seeing him like that. Sensing this, Columbia reteamed him with Jack Holt quickly and tried to capture the magic of Flight again, but it was too late. However, if that movie miscast wasn't really the culprit, his taking off 2 years between 32 and 34 probably was. I cannot find a reason why he took a 2-year vacation off from the movies, but when he returned, as often was the case, the opportunities for him were B-movies at Poverty Row. Don't get me wrong though, like all stars that I've covered who have done the same, Ralph did some excellent work and brought his considerable talent to character work for another decade. You can find some of Ralph's best films on YouTube, including The Greatest Question, Dream Street, The Extra Girl, That Certain Thing, Flight, Dirigible, Speed Limited, Alimony, and you could even capture him with The Caped Crusader, Batman and Robin. You can also find a number of his silent comedy shorts. Ralph Graves was a true talent, equally adept at drama and comedy, but was a real physical comedy genius when given the opportunity. What a legend. I must thank my sources for this episode: Nitrateville, Virtual History, WikiTree, Trav Estes' blog, Travalanche, Find a Grave, IMDb, FamilySearch.org, and Archive.org for their digitization of moving picture world and variety. Please like and subscribe or follow this account if you want to learn more about the history of silent film stars whose stardom lasted only briefly in the talkies. Up next, join me as I investigate the silent, the talkie career of Lawrence Gray. Thank you so much for joining me. Have a great day.